I mean that. I don't ever do this hardly. I do around the church, but I don't in meetings like this. I don't. But Miss Allen, I just feel like asking you to testify. I just feel like that's been on my heart through this service. Yes. Yeah.
It's such a privilege to know when that song said it all. I just want to thank you, Lord.
Yes.
Oh, He's been so good to me. I know He makes the good times outweigh the bad. He blesses us when we just can't make it ourselves.
That's Him.
Just a few weeks ago, I was so low, I just couldn't go no more. I was even asking my cousin, I said, "But where's the grace?"
Yes.
I didn't feel like I could go any further.
Amen. Man. Go ahead. Help yourself. Shout on. Shout on, sister. Yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Help yourself. Yes. Yeah. Yes. That's right. Yes. Woo. Yes. Amen. What about that? Yeah. What about that, Brother Lance? Yes.
Oh, He answered that struggle. God just permitted that. That has to give anybody's got to give some encouragement.
Yes, I believe that.
He rubs on it a whole lot.
Oh my goodness. Isn't He good to us? I don't want to try to be sensational. I hope you know that, but I want y'all to come back and sing another verse of that. Is that okay this morning? It's just so sweet to trust in Jesus. I wouldn't have y'all do that if that wasn't on my heart. I mean, God is my witness. While she's testifying, the Lord said, I want another verse of that. It may not even be for us. It may just be for Him. Wouldn't that be good if this service may not be for us. It may be for Him this morning. Yeah. It's just so sweet. If your back's ever been against the wall and you didn't have anything else to trust, you found out God's all you got. And then you found out He's all you needed. You found out it's just so sweet that when I have nobody else to lean on, when nobody else can help me where I'm at, I got a strong shoulder. I got a strong shoulder. That's Him. I really think the further we go in this life, the more we're going to need that shoulder to lean on. But isn't it good to know it's just as strong today as it ever was? I don't want to just try to do something to be doing it, but I just think the Lord wants that song one more time. How much money did we get for Brother Lance? $1,328. Boy, I want to praise God for that. And I know he don't feel this way, but I think y'all will agree with me. Brother Lance is worth every dime of that. He's worth every dime of it.
I was just thrilled beyond measure yesterday when I got here. I didn't know Brother Lance was going to be here. We're together every year in January, and that didn't work out this year. And I thought, Lord, I hope I get to see Brother Lance again. And then to come to this meeting, and then Brother Lance was telling me how it worked out that he got here. And that just made my day yesterday. Wow. And then to see him today, energized by the Spirit of God, man, that just ignited me. And Brother Rogers talking about the influence he had on his son and family. You can just see touches of Lance all across the country. This literally happened. Of course, I really don't know music that well, but my wife does. And we went into this service, and there's a young man playing a guitar among all the piano and everything else. She said, I've never seen this boy. She said, that boy right there has been influenced by Lance Carpenter. I said, how do you know that? She said, I can tell the way he plays that guitar. We went up. I couldn't wait after service to prove her wrong. And I said, you know Brother Lance Carpenter? He said, yeah. I said, he's taught me about everything I know about the guitar. I said, darling, you was right again. But, boy, I don't know that we can comprehend how privileged we are in life when God allows special people to come through. And I've had a lot of people come through my life, but no one any more special than Brother Lance Carpenter. And I think we all feel that way. But I would venture on to say now, he's about as close to a saint as you can get, but he ain't perfect. I want to testify to that. Brother Lance, I have found out, will lie if he has to. We were in a meeting in Florida, and the atmosphere was about like this. People all over the altar. And you'd have to know the pastor. He precious fella, but where it come from, I don't know. It wasn't the Spirit for it. I'll tell you that right now. But I just happened to be focused. I was up there where I could see it, and he turned to Brother Lance and said, with an atmosphere like this, and it was still going on, and said, you want to do the Bible? And I thought, where's this going? Brother Lance spun around. I could tell he was, he said, no, he said, you want to do it? He said, the pastor said, no, I can't do it. He said, you do it. He said, I don't know it. I just fell over. I said, Brother Lance don't know the Bible. He could play it upside down behind his back any way you wanted to play it. So every year since then, I've been asking if he's learned the Bible. He didn't go to Sundays. I said, Brother Lance, you flat out lied right there. He said, well, what else could I do? So he's a saint, but no, he ain't perfect. And the reason why I loved it, because that's exactly what I'd have said. In the atmosphere like that, I said, man, he's just like me. He lies too. But now don't let that bother you. Neither one of us lie as bad as we used to. So we are doing better. Ain't we, Brother Lance? I love you too. Well, ain't that wonderful? Ain't that wonderful? There might be 2 or 3 others in here ain't perfect. Hard to tell. Well, I'm just fiddling is what I'm doing. Anybody else thinks they can handle it a little better? Come on. Yeah, but ain't this wonderful? This is wonderful. It's a monumental day for me, I'll tell you. A monumental day. Never will forget it. Well, let's take our Bibles and turn to the book of Genesis and chapter number 37. We began yesterday preaching on this matter of hands. Didn't realize until I began to look at this how much the Bible emphasizes our hands, I think, because they're connected to our hearts. And we saw how that David had those sensitive hands. I want my hands to be sensitive. God to be able to use them in other folks' lives. But I want us to look for a few moments this morning. We're going to use a favorite Bible character by the name of Joseph, and I want to note the references. I won't look at all of them, but there are over 20 references in Joseph's life as to the hands that touched him or that handled him. My emphasis is going to be those what I call saving hands. We're going to notice how that in each circumstance, Joseph seems to have the small hand. But somehow God is working in him and on him through these other hands to bring him to the place, as he told his brethren, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Because he wanted me to preserve you, and he uses the word, he sent me here to save you. And of course we realize how when the king put that ring on his finger, he gave him some big hands. So the Lord was taking him from those little hands to give him some large hands, from some small hands to give him some saving hands. And with those saving hands, he saved his family. With those saving hands, he saved the nation. With those saving hands in that day, he saved the whole world. Sort of reminds me of another set of hands. The saving hands of Christ. And how that Joseph in reality is being handled so that he could be brought from those small hands to those saving hands. And in essence, what he was doing is he was creating Jesus-like hands. He was giving him Christ-like hands. So let's look at these verses, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow 4 hand phrases that we all know. And then I'm going to give 4 concluding remarks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you an introduction. I'm going to give you a conclusion. You say, well, where's the sermon? Well, you can find that yourself at home somewhere. But let's look at these verses in Genesis chapter number 37, verse 27. Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. Now that's his brethren. They're being deceitful. They're handling him. Notice in chapter 39 and verse 1. And Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight, and he served him, and he made him overseer over his house, and over all that he had, he put into his hand. Verse 6, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand. And he knew not all that he had, save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. Verse 7, and it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph. Verse 12, she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand. Verse 13, and it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, see, he hath brought in an Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. Verse 20, Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were bound, and he was there in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph, and showed him mercy, and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. The keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison, and whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand. Now let's move over to chapter number 41 and verse 42. Joseph has been handled by his brothers. He has been handled by the Ishmaelites, the gypsies. The hand of Potiphar has controlled him. Potiphar's wife has touched him. He's been in prison under the authority of the prison keeper's hands. And then notice in verse number 42, of course you know the story how the king Pharaoh can't sleep. They tell him there's a boy in prison that can interpret dreams. So he pulls him out and he does interpret the dreams. In verse 42, Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand. That's some pretty big hands right there. Verse 44, and Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift his hand. Now the question could be asked, how in the world does a young man persevere through all of this handling and touching by other hands? How's he ever going to rise above that? What's going to get him through? Look in chapter 49 and verse number 22. It is here that Joseph's father Jacob is about to pass off the scene. He calls in his boys. He blesses them, says a bit about their history, and also gives some prophecy concerning their lives. And in these verses, he's dealing with Joseph. Look at it in verse 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well whose branches run over the wall. The archers have sorely grieved him and shot at him and hated him. How's he going to get by? Verse 24. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. Aren't you glad there's some unseen hands amidst all of those other hands that are touching your life? I'm interested in this matter of how Joseph is being handled, and God is bringing him through these hands to where he can use his hands as Christ-like hands or saving hands. I want to emphasize through these hand phrases that we all know and to make this application. First of all, I would pull a phrase out of time and history. I would say that Joseph, in this matter of being handled, is a man who is handmade. Of course, anything handmade is sort of special. And God allows him to be handmade. I mean by that, Joseph does not not will nor choose to be bought and sold and traded. It is not his desire to be put into the pit nor in prison. He would not have wanted to become a slave or a servant. He had no desire, no doubt, to move to a place called Egypt, but it was beyond his control because he's got the small hands. He's not going to be able to break loose from his brother's big hands. He's not going to be able to supersede the many hands of the Ishmaelites. And once he gets into Egypt, the nation and the environment there would press him down. And of course, behind those bars, there's no way that he can exit. His hands in every scenario is too small. And there are those hands that are forcing him. Those hands that are pushing him. Those hands that are shoving him. He is handmade. And of course, can I say to you, through the processes of life, none of us are here simply because of our own hands. No man lives to himself. No man dies to himself. There's a lot of hands that have touched your life and my life to bring us to where we are. Now, I notice some terms that are embedded in these hand texts that lets us know how they handled him. The Bible said his brothers stripped him, of course, of that coat. And also it says that he was sold by them. The Bible tells us that the Ishmaelites brought him down into Egypt. And then it tells us that Pharaoh bought him. And then it tells us that Pharaoh's wife, or Potiphar's wife, Potiphar's wife took that coat from his back. And then the Bible said he was put into prison. He is a man that is handmade. He is simply stripped and sold and bought and took and put into prison. And if that's not bad enough, it's who is involved that really makes it sad. Because he's been handled by his family, his own blood kin. He's being forced and shoved and pushed by foreigners, those Ishmaelites. Thank God there are some favorable hands that are involved in it. Those of Potiphar. I believe Potiphar was kind to him, even though he made a servant out of him. I think the prison keeper was kind to him, even though he had to be in prison. And then there were those fiendish hands of that wicked woman that touched his life. In other words, he's a man that's been touched by men. He's a man that's been handled by women. He has been handled by the rich. He has been forced and pushed by the poor. The evil and the kind have touched his life. There have been hands from every different sort that has worked on him and has handled him. But again, I say that's life. There are all kinds of hands that are going to press against you. Good hands, bad hands, kind hands, wicked hands. And we could take a moment, all of us, and think back through our own lives. And think about all of the hands. Thank God for that loving hand of a mama or a grandmother or a father that has worked so hard to provide for you. And those that have been kind to you as far as substance is concerned, or work or finances. Those good hands, but then there's always going to be some of those bad and wicked hands. That's right. But the thing that seems to leap out to me is in spite of all these hands that made him, he always seems